The giant crystal halls of Crexa Prime buzzed with angry voices as 12 different alien races argued about whether humans could join their war alliance. The meeting room was huge, with walls that sparkled like diamonds, but the mood inside was dark and heavy. General Thokmar stood in the center like a mountain of muscle and metal. He had 4 thick arms that moved like tree branches as he pointed at the floating screen showing Earth's soldiers. His skin looked like grey stone, and when he spoke his voice was so deep it made the floor shake. "Just look at these pathetic creatures," he said, his words turning into growls. "They're tiny compared to us. Their bones break easily. They die after only a few decades while we live for centuries. And look how they fight each other instead of working together." Around the room, other alien leaders nodded their heads in agreement. The Saurex delegates, who looked like giant lizards with sharp teeth, hissed their approval. Their yellow eyes glowed as they watched videos of human conflicts on the display screen. Queen Zacht clicked her insect-like mouthparts together, making a sound like breaking glass. She had the body of a giant ant, but stood upright like a person. Her many eyes reflected the room's crystal lights as she spoke in a buzzing voice. "We have studied their military files carefully," she announced. "Humans have a fatal weakness. They care too much about individual soldiers. When one of their people gets hurt, they risk everything to save that person. This makes them useless in real war, where you must sacrifice some to save many." The other aliens made sounds of agreement. The rock-like granite lords rumbled deep in their chests. The gas cloud beings flickered with colors that meant yes in their strange language. Even the peaceful tree people swayed their branches in a way that showed they agreed. Han Minho, Earth's ambassador, stood quietly in the middle of all these giant creatures. He was an older man with grey hair and kind eyes, wearing Earth's best diplomatic uniform, but next to these aliens who were twice his size, he looked like a child among adults. "Honorable members of the Council," he said, his voice steady and calm. "I understand your concerns about our physical abilities, but humanity brings something different to this alliance. We have imagination, creativity, and the ability to find solutions when everything seems hopeless." General Thokmar's 4 arms waved dismissively, like he was swatting away a fly. "Pretty words won't stop the void swarm," he rumbled. "When those dark ships come eating planets, we need soldiers who can fight without crying about their feelings." The other aliens laughed at this. It wasn't friendly laughter, but the mean kind that made Han Minho's face turn red with embarrassment and anger. The vote happened quickly. One by one, each alien species said no to humanity joining their alliance. The Crexans said no because humans were too small. The Saurax said no because humans were too emotional. The insect people said no because humans couldn't think like a hive mind. 12 different species, 12 rejections. Each no hit Han Minho like a punch to the stomach, but he kept standing straight with his shoulders back. When the voting finished, Han Minho slowly collected his papers and data files. His hands didn't shake, even though inside he felt like his world was ending. The other human diplomats behind him looked ready to cry, but their leader stayed strong. "You may discover, General Thokmar," Han Minho said as he walked toward the exit, "that true strength comes in many different forms. Sometimes the greatest power is not in the biggest muscles or the sharpest claws." As the human delegation left the crystal chamber, alien laughter echoed behind them. The sound followed them down the long hallways and into their ship. But Han Minho had the last word, even if the aliens didn't understand it yet. Far away in the darkest parts of space, something hungry was moving toward their galaxy. The real test of strength was coming soon. News of humanity's rejection spread across the galaxy faster than a wildfire. Within days, every alien in the known universe had heard the story, and most of them thought it was hilarious. On Nexus Station, the biggest trading post in the galaxy, Saurax merchants set up holographic displays outside their shops. The lizard-like aliens had created comedy shows featuring tiny human soldiers running away from battles, screaming and crying. Their forked tongues flicked out as they laughed, showing rows of sharp teeth. Customers gathered around these displays, pointing and making hissing sounds that passed for laughter among their kind. "Look at the little pink creatures," one merchant said to his customers. "They think they can fight real warriors." Watch this part, where they stop to help their wounded, instead of finishing the enemy. The crowd erupted in more hissing laughter. To them, helping injured soldiers seemed like the stupidest thing anyone could do in a war. In the crystal gardens of the Zeth Karai homeworld, the living crystal beings created musical jokes about humans. Their songs rang through their cities like wind chimes, but the words were cruel. They sang about soft pink things who believed tears could stop laser beams, and weak little mammals who hugged each other instead of fighting properly. Even the strangest aliens joined in the mockery. The gas cloud beings, who lived in space and looked like colorful mist, paused their endless journey between stars to share electromagnetic jokes. They sent funny messages through space about humanity's cute emotional problems and how humans probably asked their enemies to please stop shooting during battles. The jokes got worse as they spread. Each alien species added their own twist to the story. Some said humans fainted at the sight of blood. Others claimed humans spent more time crying than fighting. By the end of the first week, the stories were so exaggerated that aliens believed humans apologized to their enemies before battles and brought flowers instead of weapons. Back on Earth, President Kim Nari stood in the United Nations building, facing leaders from every country. The mood in the room was heavy and sad. Giant screens showed alien news broadcasts from across the galaxy, all making fun of humanity. "They're calling us the biggest joke in the universe," said the Secretary General, his voice barely above a whisper. "Our reputation is ruined before we even had a chance to prove ourselves." President Kim Nari looked at the screens showing alien comedians performing skits about cowardly humans. Her jaw was tight with anger, but her voice stayed calm and strong. "Let them laugh," she said. "They call us weak because we care about our people. They think compassion means we're fragile. Maybe they'll learn someday that the biggest threats in the universe aren't always stopped by the biggest weapons or the strongest armies." She paused and looked directly at the cameras broadcasting to the world. "History will show who was really strong, and it won't be the ones who laughed at mercy." But while the aliens were busy making jokes and feeling superior, they missed something important happening in the dark edges of space. Black ships, shaped like twisted insects, moved silently between distant stars. The Void Swarm had begun sending scout ships toward the galaxy's populated worlds. These creatures didn't care about strength or weakness, honor or shame. They only cared about consuming everything living they found. And while the mighty warrior species celebrated their superiority over humans, they completely failed to notice the real danger creeping closer. The galaxy's greatest threat was approaching, and the aliens who called themselves the universe's best warriors were too busy laughing to see it coming. Staff Sergeant Park Jiwoo pulled off her work gloves and wiped the black grease from her fingers with an old rag. She had just finished fixing the big air-making machine that kept everyone breathing on this rock of a planet called Kepler 442b. The mining colony was so far from Earth that it took messages 3 weeks to reach them. But even here, everyone had heard about the aliens rejecting humanity. While politicians back on Earth were giving sad speeches and diplomats were writing angry letters, Jiwoo had real work to do. Someone had to keep the oxygen flowing and the power running on this remote mining outpost. She didn't have time to feel sorry for herself or humanity. The warning sirens suddenly screamed through the colony's metal hallways. Jiwoo dropped her tools and ran to the monitoring station, her boots echoing on the steel floors. The computer screens were flashing red with emergency alerts that made her heart race. "No way," she whispered, staring at the sensor readings. "This can't be right." But the numbers didn't lie. 17 black ships were moving through space toward the Tau Ceti system, and they weren't friendly visitors. These were Void Swarm scouts, the nightmare creatures that ate entire planets. Jiwoo had heard stories about them from deep space traders, but she never thought she'd see them herself. Her fingers flew across her tablet computer, running numbers that made her stomach feel sick. Tau Ceti A4 had 3 million Crexan families living in their crystal cities. The space stations orbiting the planet held 2 million Sorax refugees who had fled from wars in other systems. Mining platforms throughout the system housed another 500,000 workers from a dozen different alien species. 6.5 million innocent people were about to die, and they didn't even know it yet. Jiwoo checked the military response times. The nearest Krexan war fleet was 8 days away at maximum speed. The Sorax patrol ships were even farther, but the Void Swarm would reach Tau Ceti in just 3 days. She looked around the small command room at her crew of 12 humans. There was Kim Dae-ho, the electronics expert who could fix anything with wires. Lee Min-soo, the pilot who had flown cargo ships through asteroid fields that would scare most people to death. Park Sun-hee, the demolitions expert who knew more about explosives than anyone in the outer colonies. Then Jiwoo looked out the window at their ship sitting in the docking bay. The Persistence wasn't a warship. It was just a big cargo hauler that they had modified for mining work. Instead of weapons, it had industrial lasers for cutting through asteroids. Instead of armor, it had extra hull plating to protect against space rocks. Instead of torpedoes, it had mining charges designed to blast apart mountains. "Sergeant," asked Kim Dae-ho, reading the sensor data over her shoulder, "what do we do?" Jiwoo stared at the screen, showing those 17 enemy ships moving toward. Millions of helpless civilians. The same aliens who had laughed at humanity just days ago were about to become victims of something far worse than human weakness. "They said we were too weak to matter in a real war," she said quietly, then looked at her crew with determination burning in her eyes. "I guess it's time to prove them wrong." She started walking toward the ship, calling out orders. "Dae-ho, get the engines ready for emergency launch. Min-soo, plot a course to intercept those ships before they reach Tau Ceti. Sun-hee, start loading every mining charge we have into the cargo bay." Her crew didn't ask questions or argue about the impossible odds. They just got to work, because that's what humans do when people need help. Even if those people had called them weak and laughed at their compassion, the Persistence might not look like much, but it was all they had. And sometimes, all you have is enough. The Persistence slipped out of hyperspace at the very edge of the Tau Ceti system, moving as quietly as a shadow. Park Jiwoo sat in the pilot's chair, her eyes glued to the tactical screen showing 17 black enemy ships moving in a perfect straight line toward the planets where millions of aliens lived their daily lives, completely unaware of the approaching death. These Void Swarm ships looked like giant metal insects with twisted legs and glowing red eyes. They moved together like a school of deadly fish, staying in tight formation, because that's how all the galaxy's warrior races fought their battles. Big fleets meeting other big fleets in open space, trading shots until one side won through superior firepower. But Jiwoo had spent her free time reading old Earth military books that most people forgot about. Sun Tzu taught her that the best victories come from fighting smart, not fighting hard. Rommel showed her how to use terrain to her advantage. Miyamoto Musashi explained that winning wasn't about honor or glory, it was about going home alive, while your enemy didn't. The alien military leaders fought for honor and respect. Jiwoo fought to win, and there's a big difference between those two things. She guided the Persistence into a massive asteroid field that floated between the outer planets like a three-dimensional maze of floating rocks. Military warships avoided these areas because their big engines and heavy armor made them clumsy among the spinning debris. But Jiwoo's ship was built for mining work in exactly these kinds of dangerous places. "Min-soo, bring us around that big asteroid there," she whispered into her headset. "Sun-hee, get ready to launch our presents." Her presents were mining charges that Kim Dae-ho had rigged with simple navigation computers. They weren't fancy military torpedoes, just explosive devices designed to break apart mountains, now aimed at breaking apart enemy ships. The lead Void Swarm ship never saw it coming. One moment it was cruising confidently toward its target. The next moment 4 mining charges slammed into its hull and tore it apart in a brilliant explosion. Pieces of the destroyed ship scattered like confetti against the stars. The other 16 ships immediately broke their perfect formation, just like Jiwoo knew they would. They started hunting for their attacker, spreading out to search the asteroid field. But Jiwoo was already gone, using the floating rocks like stepping stones to move to a completely different position. She hit them from above, swooping down from behind a cluster of asteroids to destroy 2 more ships. Then she vanished again before they could return fire. Next, she attacked from below, coming up from underneath their formation to cripple another enemy vessel. Each time she struck without warning and disappeared before they knew what happened. The Void Swarm ships were confused and angry. They were used to fighting enemies who stood still and traded shots like gentlemen in an old-fashioned duel. But Jiwoo kept moving, kept changing tactics, kept hitting them where they didn't expect. For 3 hours she played a deadly game of hide-and-seek among the asteroids. Every time the enemy thought they had her cornered, she found a new escape route, through gaps that were too small for their big ships. Every time they tried to predict her next move, she did something completely different. When the Krexan relief fleet finally arrived 8 days later, they couldn't believe what they found. 17 pieces of Void Swarm wreckage floated silently in space, and one beat-up human cargo ship limped toward the nearest space station with holes punched through its hull and its engines barely working. General Thokmar himself came aboard to demand an explanation. "How did you achieve this impossible victory?" he asked Jiwoo, who was sitting in the medical bay getting her wounds treated. She looked up at the four-armed alien general with tired eyes and a small smile. "You called it luck, General. I call it Tuesday." The story of what happened at Tau Ceti didn't travel through official military channels or government news broadcasts. Instead, it spread the way most important stories do, through whispered conversations in cargo bays, messages between family members, and tales shared around dinner tables across the galaxy. The alien governments tried to downplay the whole thing. Their official reports called it a minor engagement with minimal strategic significance. General Thokmar himself signed documents that described the destruction of 17 Void Swarm ships as just a lucky accident that happened when the enemy hit some asteroids. But the 3 million Krexan families who woke up alive that morning told a very different story to anyone who would listen. They talked about the small human ship that appeared from nowhere to save them. They described how one woman with a cargo hauler had done what entire alien battle fleets couldn't do. Captain Lee Sumin was hauling medical supplies to a Sorax refugee camp when she first heard the stories. The lizard-like aliens who had been making jokes about humans just weeks before now spoke about Park Jiwoo with something that sounded almost like respect. "She fought like a demon," one old Sorax warrior told Sumin over dinner. "But not for glory or conquest. She fought to protect people she had never met, people who had called her kind weak." 2 days later, when Void Swarm raiders attacked that same refugee camp, Lee Sumin didn't wait for the military to show up. She used her ship's cargo cranes to lift families to safety. Her industrial cutting tools to break through collapsed buildings and her own medical supplies to treat the wounded. Her crew of human mechanics worked for 36 hours straight, saving thousands of alien civilians who would have died waiting for proper military rescue. Word spread to other humans scattered across the galaxy. Dr. Choi Hyunwoo was working at a medical station on the frontier when wounded alien soldiers started arriving from a battle with Void Swarm forces. The alien military doctors looked at the casualties and quickly sorted them into 2 groups, those worth saving and those marked as acceptable losses. The acceptable losses were soldiers too badly hurt to return to battle quickly. In Warrior cultures, spending resources on someone who couldn't fight again was considered wasteful. These wounded aliens were left in a corner to die quietly, while the doctors focused on soldiers who could be patched up and sent back to war. Dr. Choi couldn't stand it. He and his team of human medics started treating the acceptable losses, working around the clock to save lives that alien cultures had already written off. They used techniques and medicines that warrior species had never bothered to develop, because healing someone who couldn't fight anymore wasn't considered important. Similar stories began happening all across the galaxy. Human engineers fixed alien ships that their own mechanics had given up on. Human teachers helped alien refugee children learn new languages when their own people said education was a waste of resources. Human farmers shared food with alien families when their own government said feeding outsiders was weakness. These weren't grand military victories or famous battles that would be remembered in history books. They were small individual acts of kindness that happened one person at a time. Each human acted not because they wanted glory or recognition, but because they simply couldn't watch others suffer when they had the power to help. The alien military leaders called it weakness and foolishness. They said humans were wasting time and resources on people who didn't matter. But the civilians who had been saved, the families who were still alive, the children who still had, parents, the wounded who walked again, they called it something else entirely. They called it hope. And hope, as it turned out, was more contagious than any disease, and more powerful than any weapon the galaxy had ever seen. General Thokmar's massive war fleet came out of hyperspace ready for the worst kind of battle cleanup. His ships were loaded with body recovery teams, planetary bombardment assessments, and grief counselors for the few survivors they expected to find. The tactical computers had already calculated how long it would take to rebuild the Tau Ceti colonies after the Void Swarm finished eating everything. But when his sensors swept the system, Thokmar's four eyes widened in complete confusion. Instead of burning planets and floating debris, he saw something impossible. Human cargo ships were flying back and forth between the planets and space stations, delivering food packages and medical supplies like it was just another Tuesday. "What is this?" he roared, his deep voice shaking the bridge of his flagship. "Where are the enemy forces? Where are the millions of dead?" His communication officer, a younger Krexan with nervous hands, tried to make sense of the reports coming in. "Sir, all civilian populations are alive. The space stations are intact. The mining platforms are still operational." Thokmar stomped across his bridge to the main communication screen and demanded to speak with the Krexan colonial administrator immediately. The administrator appeared on screen, his forearms shaking with an emotion that Thokmar couldn't identify. "Administrator Kexavel, explain this situation immediately," Thokmar commanded. "Our intelligence showed 17 Void Swarm ships approaching this system 3 days ago. Where are they?" The administrator's arms trembled even more. "General, there was indeed a battle. The Void Swarm arrived exactly as predicted. 17 ships moving in standard attack formation toward our populated worlds. And where is my enemy? Where are the casualties? The enemy ships were destroyed, sir. All 17 of them." Thokmar's massive fists clenched. "Destroyed? By whom? I see no evidence of our battle fleets. Did the Sauraks arrive early? Did the crystal beings send their war singers?" "No, sir," the administrator said quietly. "It was one ship, a human cargo vessel called the Persistence. The pilot identified herself as Park Jiwoo." The general's forearms went completely still. In all his centuries of military service, he had never heard anything so ridiculous. One ship, one human. Ship defeated 17 Void Swarm vessels. "Yes, sir. We have the battle recordings if you wish to review them." For the next 2 hours, Thokmar studied the tactical footage with growing amazement and confusion. The human ship moved through the asteroid field like a dancer, striking from impossible angles and disappearing before the enemy could respond. She used mining equipment as weapons, turned space debris into shields, and fought with a style that broke every rule in every military textbook he had ever read. "This makes no sense," he muttered to his tactical officers. "She had no backup, no support fleet, no chance of survival. Why did she even try?" The administrator's voice came softly through the speakers. "Sir, we asked her that same question when we brought her aboard for medical treatment. She said she couldn't just watch millions of people die when she had the power to do something about it." Thokmar stared at the battle recordings again. The human hadn't fought for territory, or resources, or even for her own people. She had risked everything to save aliens, who had rejected and mocked her species just days before. "She fought like someone who had nothing to lose and everything to protect," the administrator continued. "Not for glory or honor, but because it was the right thing to do." For the first time in his long military career, General Thokmar felt something he had never experienced before. Doubt about everything he thought he knew about strength and warfare. He looked at his massive fleet, his powerful weapons, his loyal soldiers, and wondered if all of it might be missing the most important point. Maybe strength wasn't about having the biggest guns or the strongest armor. Maybe it was about being willing to use whatever you had to protect others, even when they didn't deserve it. The great general sat in his command chair, staring at the stars, and wondered if the humans had been trying to teach them something. All along, the stories spread like seeds on the wind, carried by traders, refugees, and ordinary people who had witnessed something extraordinary. These weren't the official news reports that governments controlled, but the real stories that people told each other over shared meals and late-night conversations. On cargo ships traveling between star systems, alien crews whispered about the human mechanic who had crawled into a damaged reactor core to save a Sorax family trapped inside. The radiation should have killed her in minutes, but she stayed until everyone was safe, then spent 3 weeks in the hospital recovering from poisoning that would have been fatal to most species. In refugee camps scattered across war-torn systems, families shared stories about the human doctors who worked for days without sleep, treating wounds that alien medics said were hopeless. These humans used strange techniques their warrior cultures had never bothered to learn, because saving someone who couldn't fight anymore wasn't considered valuable. Hive Queen Zaxth sat in her crystal palace, staring at computer screens that showed mathematical models of human behavior. For the first time in her 1,000-year life, her tactical computers couldn't make sense of the data they were receiving. "This is impossible," she clicked to her advisors, her compound eyes reflecting. The screens glow. Every calculation shows that intelligent beings will choose their own survival over helping strangers. Yet these humans consistently do the opposite. Her military computers had analyzed hundreds of human actions across the galaxy, and every single analysis came back with the same result: error. The humans were acting in ways that defied every logical prediction about how living creatures should behave. On the mining world of Kepler-7, alien workers requested human supervisors because they actually cared if everyone made it home alive each day. On the trade station at Vega Prime, alien families asked for human teachers because they spent time with children that their own educators considered too slow or damaged to bother with. Captain Ko Jinwoo had become legendary among spacers for fixing ships that alien mechanics had declared beyond repair. Using nothing but spare parts and stubborn determination, he would spend days working on vessels that their own crews had given up on. He never asked for payment, just made sure everyone could get home safely. The most surprising change was happening in the alien civilian populations themselves. For centuries, they had looked at their warrior leaders with automatic respect and fear. The biggest, strongest, most ruthless fighters were naturally considered the best leaders. But now, alien children were asking their parents difficult questions. Why did the strong warriors let people die when humans risked everything to save them? Why did military leaders talk about honor while humans actually lived it? Why did the greatest fighters in the galaxy need help from the species they called weakest? On Sorax colonies, young lizard people began questioning why their culture threw away wounded soldiers instead of healing them like humans did. Crexan teenagers asked why their forearmed strength mattered if they wouldn't use it to protect others. Even the hive-minded insect species began experiencing individual thoughts about whether survival of the strongest was really the best way to live. The warrior species noticed their own people looking at them differently. The automatic respect was being replaced by uncomfortable questions about what strength actually meant, and whether being feared was the same as being respected. But while this quiet revolution was changing hearts and minds across the galaxy, something far more dangerous was moving in the deepest darkness of space. The Void Swarm's main fleet had finally stirred from its feeding grounds at the galaxy's edge. These weren't the small scout ships that Park Ji-woo had destroyed. This was the full swarm, thousands of vessels that could devour entire star systems, led by creatures that had consumed a dozen galaxies before arriving at this one. The scattered acts of human courage across the galaxy were about to face the ultimate test. All the compassion and determination in the universe wouldn't mean anything if there was no one left alive to protect. The real war was finally coming, and this time, everyone would discover what strength truly meant when the darkness arrived. The key, darkness came all at once, like a nightmare that swallowed the stars themselves. The Void Swarm's main fleet burst out of hyperspace in a formation so massive that it blocked entire constellations. 1,000 black ships, each one the size of a city, moved together like a plague of metal locusts heading straight for the galaxy's heart. General Thokmar stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching his sensors count the enemy vessels. His Four hands worked frantically over the tactical displays as he tried to comprehend what he was seeing. "Impossible," he whispered. "There are too many of them." But the warrior species had faced overwhelming odds before. They assembled the greatest war fleet in galactic history, Krexan battle cruisers bristling with plasma cannons, Sarax dreadnoughts, armed with planet cracker missiles, crystal ships that could sing enemies to death with harmonic weapons. Millions of the galaxy's finest warriors prepared for the battle that would decide the fate of all civilized life. They charged into battle with honor songs on their lips and victory prayers in their hearts. They followed the same tactics that had won them 1,000 wars, massive formations meeting in open space, the strongest fleet winning through superior firepower and disciplined courage. The slaughter was complete within 3 hours. The Void Swarm had spent eons consuming other galaxies, learning from every species they devoured. They had adapted beyond the predictable patterns that warrior cultures always followed. When the alien fleets formed their traditional battle lines, the swarms split into smaller groups and attacked from all directions at once. When the warriors tried to retreat and regroup, the enemy had already surrounded them. Every textbook strategy, every honored tradition, every time-tested tactic failed completely. The greatest military leaders in galactic history watched their fleets turn into floating scrap metal and wondered how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. Park Jiwoo sat in the command chair of the Persistence, now patched with metal plates from a dozen different ship graveyards. Around her floated a ragtag collection of vessels that nobody would call a proper fleet: human cargo haulers, alien refugee transports, mining ships, medical vessels, and research craft. Most of them weren't even armed with real weapons. Through her communications array, she could hear the panicked radio calls from the dying alien fleets, proud warriors begging for help, mighty generals screaming orders that nobody could follow, entire civilizations crying out as their protectors fell one by one. She opened a channel to every human ship within 1,000 light years. The response was immediate. Voices from across the galaxy, people she had never met but who had heard her story and made the same choice she had. "This is Sergeant Park, calling all human vessels," she said calmly. "I know you can all see what's happening. Out there, the strongest warriors in the galaxy just got destroyed by enemies they couldn't understand. And now those enemies are heading for every populated world we know." She paused, watching explosions bloom like deadly flowers in the distance where alien battle fleets were dying. "They called us weak because we cry when our friends die. They said we were soft because we won't leave wounded people behind. They laughed at us because we care more about saving lives than winning battles." Her voice grew stronger. "Maybe they were right. Maybe we are weak by their standards." Captain Lee Sumin's voice crackled through the static. "But we're still here, aren't we, Sergeant?" Dr. Choi Hyunwoo added from his medical ship. "And there are millions of people who need our help." Engineer Kim Tae-hyung called in from the outer rim. "Those mighty warriors are running out of ideas pretty fast." Nurse Oh Seo-young transmitted from her hospital ship. "Someone has to do something, and it looks like we're the only ones left." Hundreds of other voices joined the conversation. Humans who had never wanted to be soldiers, never sought glory or honor, but couldn't stand by and watch others suffer when they had the power to help. "Copy that, Sergeant," Lee Sumin said with grim determination. "Time to show them what real weakness looks like." The final battle didn't happen where anyone expected it would. While the great alien fleets were being destroyed in the outer systems, the Void Swarm's main force headed straight for Kepler Station, the galaxy's largest civilian population center. 5 billion people from dozens of different species lived and worked there, and they had nowhere to run. Park Jiwoo's ragtag collection of cargo ships, medical vessels, and mining haulers arrived just as the black enemy fleet surrounded the station. Her communications crackled with hundreds of human voices, ordinary people who had never wanted to be heroes, but couldn't abandon others in their darkest hour. The battle that followed would be talked about for thousands of years, but not because of any brilliant military strategy or advanced weapons. It was remembered because it showed the galaxy something they had never seen before: people fighting not to conquer territory or win glory, but simply to give others the right to keep existing. Captain Lee Sumin used her cargo ship's loading, Cranes to evacuate families from damaged sections of the station, flying through enemy fire to reach people who everyone else had written off as impossible to save. Dr. Choi Hyun-woo turned his medical transport into a flying hospital, treating alien wounded while explosions lit up the space around him. Engineer Kim Tae-hyung rigged mining charges to create shields around evacuation ships, buying precious minutes for refugees to escape. Nurse Oh Seo-young flew her hospital ship directly between Void Swarm attackers and civilian transports, taking damage that should have killed her, but refusing to leave her post. For 6 hours, these ordinary humans held the line against an enemy that had consumed entire galaxies. They fought with improvised weapons, creative tactics, and the kind of stubborn determination that comes from caring more about other people's lives than your own survival. Park Ji-woo watched her friends disappear, one by one, their ships overwhelmed by impossible odds. Her own vessel, the Persistence, was barely holding together. The engines were failing, the hull was cracked in a dozen places, and she had maybe 5 minutes of life support left. But she could see the Void Swarm's command ship, the massive vessel, that controlled the entire enemy fleet. If she could just reach it. "This is Sergeant Park to all human vessels," she transmitted as she aimed her dying ship at the heart of the enemy formation. "It's been an honor serving with all of you. Tell my family back on Earth that I wasn't weak. Tell them I was exactly as strong as I needed to be." The Persistence slammed into the Void Swarm command ship like a bullet fired from the heart of humanity itself. The explosion tore through the enemy's coordination network, turning their organized assault into chaos. But more importantly, it showed every alien survivor watching from the station something they had never witnessed before. They saw a person choose to die, not for personal glory or military victory, but to give strangers a chance to live another. General Thokma's flagship was drifting powerless when human medical teams boarded to help his wounded crew. These people had every reason to hate him. He had rejected their species, mocked their compassion, and called them too weak to matter. But they asked no questions about the past. They just started saving lives, because that's what humans do. 6. Months later, Thokma stood before the rebuilt Galactic Council to deliver the most important speech in galactic history. His forearms gestured not with arrogance, but with humility as he addressed the assembled representatives. "For generations, we measured strength by size, weapons, and the willingness to sacrifice others for victory," he said. "We called humans weak because they cried for their dead and refused to abandon their wounded. We were wrong about everything." He paused, looking at the empty chair where Earth's ambassador would soon sit. "They are not weak. We had simply forgotten what true strength looks like. The strongest thing any being can do is care about someone else more than themselves." The vote to admit humanity into the Galactic Alliance was unanimous, but something far more important changed that day. Across the galaxy, entire civilizations began questioning their most basic beliefs about power and strength. Park Ji-woo never lived to see the new galaxy her sacrifice had created, but her legacy echoed through the stars. The universe would never again mistake compassion for weakness or confuse cruelty with courage. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is simply care.